Friends, we are back here chatting again about the book Think Again by Adam Grant, and specifically how it applies to technologists and software development. We'll be talking about chapters 1 and 2 today. One of the really interesting ideas from this section is Adam Grant's idea of humility. And it's maybe not the take on humility that we think about in the common vernacular. It's this idea of an intellectual humility. So I'm curious, as we jump in here, what were your take on Grant's idea of intellectual humility?
It's really productive in terms of how most people view humility. If we're thinking about, just what that brings up for most people who haven't thought about humility, but they're, thinking about being humble. They might think it means thinking less of themselves, right? And which is definitely a thing that will stop them from doing things that they might do well to do. They might need to speak up in that meeting or, send that message. Mm-hmm. But being humble in their estimation means they probably shouldn't, because they're not the sort of person who does that, and they're not good enough to do that, basically. And Grant's thing about humble, going back to the word root for meaning grounded, not less than, right? Mm-hmm. It takes us in a completely different direction with that. Like you would make different choices depending on your interpretation of humility, and if you interpret it in a more productive way, like no, you're gonna like double check yourself. You're not gonna be overconfident, but you're gonna go ahead and do that thing that's a little scary because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I feel like it helps. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. but yeah, starting early today. But like you have, let me see if I can circle back around. But like humility, it's about being truthful about where you're actually at, and knowing where you're at and being honest with where you're at. You can develop the tools to get you to where you need. And like he lays out three things that he thinks people who are what he refers to as confident humility, or express confident humility. They work hard, they work smarter, and they are learners. And if you have those things honed, you're going to be able to achieve what you need. But for people who overestimate their abilities or underestimate their abilities, they're going to have an unrealistic view of where they're at, so to hit their target, they're aiming at something that isn't really there, and hoping that they will eventually get there. Sometimes they hit it, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, I think it's important for us all, not just technologists, for everyone, to spend a little bit of time learning about cognitive biases or mental processes or cognitive load, because we get in this mental trap where we think that our brains are very similar to computers, right? Like RAM doesn't get corrupted and the CPU executes the instructions correctly. And you start learning about cognitive biases, even like an anchoring bias, where you tend to believe things that have been true in the past, or the bias where like the more you hear something, the more you believe it. Mm-hmm. And this isn't something that the weak-minded fall into. This is something that humans fall into. Mm-hmm. And so kind of just knowing some of your weak spots, knowing that you can think about something very emotionally and not think rationally all the time, knowing that being tired also impacts your cognitive ability. And when you start to know yourself, like know the truth about your own brain, then you can start making better decisions. And I want to be careful here because I don't want anyone to think that I am in any way demeaning anybody. Like our industry has enough wrong struggles with imposter syndrome. Like if you're watching this, I think you're a good developer. I'm not trying to say that. But I do think it's
It's
helpful.
just everybody else.
Thanks, Eric.
I think it's helpful to be grounded and just know where you're weak. Know what you don't know. Like that leads to good learning, which is what actually leads to better decision making in the future.
And I might push back on the verbiage, the weak verbiage there. I would say where you haven't had experience yet, instead of maybe weak.
You know, I think I'm going to split a hair with you. I think
Okay.
it's okay to say something about your skill set, something in your tools is weak. Not saying the person is weak.
Oh,
And
that's a good point of view.
That's an important distinction, which I think I take it that you're reacting to that, Brock. The idea of calling a person weak, even if you're calling part of a person weak. Yeah, you're right. That's not a helpful thing. But I think also in what Eric was talking about, there's this, know your brain, know how your brain works. If your brain was like a computer, which it's not, if you downloaded an app on it, it would be different from that app on every other computer. It would just behave differently, and it might not even work, right?
Mm-hmm.
On a computer, you download an app on this machine, it works on this machine, it works on that machine, that's not even always true. But yeah, it's the brain is separate from the identity, which I think, that's what we have to be careful about, is calling a person weak or connecting any of these ideas to their identity, which is where all of this, I think, falls down.
Yeah, I agree. I guess we'll jump to the identity part. Like I feel like, especially in the first chapter, like he's trying to split up or identify what the kind of break down how people deal with parts of their identity, and that one of the things that I have found to be true, and Paul Graham has an amazing essay on this called Keep Your Identity Small. And it is one of my favorite essays by him, but he talks about having your own ideas and but not making them part of your identity. Like as soon as you make something a part of your identity, you're no longer able to separate out someone's different view on whatever the idea is from a personal attack on you. And as soon as you can kind of hold that idea at arm's length and be able to remove that from who you are, you can look at something more realistically, and realize that that person isn't critiquing you as a person; they're critiquing an idea.
Yeah, and I'm going to walk right up to a third rail here and say this is what people commonly say is wrong with our politics. The quote unquote identity politics is that we've chosen, we've attached these ideas, these notions, these colors to our identity. And there's, now there's no discussion. There's no budging. It's you're attacking me as a person and we're done talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Attacking right now.
Yeah.
Well, trying to keep this close to technology. See, that's me running away from the politics thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you're here, Eric.
What are the things that you would say you want in your professional identity, and what are the things, getting back to what Brock was saying, like, yeah, there are a lot of things that shouldn't be. So let's give some concrete examples, like what should be part of your professional identity and what specifically should not.
I'm going to say identity, well, and sort of a sideways addendum to the question is that identity is important in attaching good things to it, because when you say, I'm a person who does this, when you attach something to your identity, that's an incredible motivator. It will get you through almost any obstacle, which is why it's bad to attach things that could change to your identity or things that should change. Like, I am a Java developer. I am a, you know what I mean? Like, I am a mainframe guy.
Or I'm a VB developer.
Right.
That may be the most scariest phrase that I've ever heard out of somebody's mouth. But that's like I try and keep technologies out of my identity. Like I feel like my classification of myself as an architect is probably part of my something that I would keep as part of my identity. Like I'm not specific to a technology or like a framework or something like that.
If the word architect had not been handed to you by the culture of software, would it still be the right word?
I think so, and I think that's why I said architect and not like software architect, because because I feel like granted, I am not going to be designing a building like that. Nobody should ever walk through or have to deal with a building that I architect. But
disclaimer, good humility.
But I feel like what I do and the underlying things that they get to, and like being, I feel like that encompasses, like architect encompasses like technical leadership, mentoring, coaching, designing, those like huge areas. And I feel like that whatever name you would give as an umbrella to that concept, that would be what I feel like I am.
So broadening that, what should people in our field look to attach to their identity? We've told them what not to do. And you've given a good example of what to do.
I'm going to use an example from an acquaintance of ours, someone that was pretty loud on the internet, a guy named Jeremy Clark. And he kind of has two things in his online identity. One is a quote from Tron, which he kind of uses out of context on purpose, but the quote is, "I fight for the user." And so this idea that as a developer, the essential work is making the experience better for the end user. And then the other thing he'll sometimes use as a tagline is a developer betterer, as in someone that makes other developers better. Yeah. And like having that like long-term view of what you want to be known for, like what are the things that I'm really going to invest time in? Like if those are kind of the two tent poles, I don't want to speak for him, maybe there are more, but those like big picture timeless qualities I think are important. And so like, yeah, I'm going to be about user functionality. I'm going to be about value. I'm going to be about improving other people.
Yeah. And it's an interesting point that, he has these tent poles out there publicly as part of his identity. And you're also assuming there are probably some private ones that he hasn't shared that also guide his actions. But I think that the overarching idea here is when you attach something to your identity, you're making it like it's a North Star. It's always there. Mm-hmm. it's something that you follow when you're lost. It's something you refer to. So if it's something that you could see always referring to get you out of a jam, that might be a good thing to attach to your identity. I help connect people to the people that they need to work with. I work with, people who have a tough time maintaining legacy code. Things like that. Stuff that's you're fairly sure is going to be a regular problem to be solved.
I think another angle to that might be understanding your why and why you do things, and that knowing your why and like knowing what gives you, like when you are getting up and you're going to have a hard day, what makes you get out of bed instead of just saying, you know what, I'm going to turn off this alarm and I'll wake up tomorrow. Like what gets you out of bed and ready and motivated to tackle the day?
Power builder.
But I do. It's a good point, Brock, because over the course of everyone's career, you're always going to have some project that is not the one you would have chosen. There's going to be some part of your project where it's like, this is not, when I dream of developing software, this and thing. I was on a project a couple of years ago that, for reasons that had to do with corporate politics and acquisitions and all kinds of weird stuff, we had to rebrand the site multiple times within 1 year. And it was kind of frustrating because there's a lot of work that we did. I think it was good work. And we threw it away. And then we did it again and we threw it away again. And if my identity was like, oh man, I'm a CSS developer, like, man, I just threw away a lot of what I did. But especially in that third rebranding, having something to come back to, like, no, we're here to provide value to the users. We're here to provide value to our customers. And that, helps you power through some of those things that maybe weren't what you would hope they would be.
Yeah, all that throwing away of work, there was a net gain, not only for your customer, but for you as and your team as a developer. Am I correct?
Yeah.
In some ways, but in some ways, it felt like the branding was between us and like the other functionality that we wanted to get to. So when you think about the value that we want to provide to the end users, let's say there were 3 or 4 major features, and the first one was branding, right? And then we, instead of going on to the second major feature, we're now circling back around the first one. So there was some frustration that we couldn't be delivering new value.
That's interesting, and this may be a sidetrack, but I think it's worth mentioning that it's good to focus on the customer, but a hyper focus on the customer could lead you to solve some business program or problems the wrong way, or internalize that you're doing the wrong thing when you're doing something for the business. If you're thinking about like, what about user experience design at Facebook, where it's, this is a company that makes its money not from users, but from users.
Yeah,
the users are part of the machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they must have some software changes, some projects, some work that has to do with, things that benefit the business and explicitly do not benefit the user. And so it's worth talking about who your user is, and being clear on that might also keep you more motivated. So in your scenario, Eric, it was something that served, the business more than it served the end user. And if you guys were hyper-focused on the user, which was a good thing, but it might have also made you miserable in the meantime.
Yeah, and I think miserable is a strong word, right?
As
This is-
miserable as nerds get. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these are very clearly first world problems. I want to make that clear.
Right.
You're still getting paid to write software, so things are still pretty good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
CSS though.
Yeah,
But and I think that he hasn't covered it yet, but maybe it's like taking things personally too. And I think that goes along with identity.
Yes.
So
and that ties into one of the other things that Grant was talking about, where I don't think he called them cognitive biases, but just these thinking modes that are not always healthy. And he called them preacher mode, prosecutor mode, and politician mode. You know, preacher mode where you have taken on something as part of your identity, and now you're pushing that on everyone else. In prosecutor mode, kind of the opposite, where Brock has an idea and whatever it is, I am 100% opposed to it. I just want to prosecute it. Or politician mode, which is where I just want everyone to get along and be happy, and maybe not search for the best ideas, but just look for consensus.
well,
Yeah.
so I took the politician as being that they wanted to influence everyone else to believe what they believed, and
How's that
the
different from
prosecutor
preacher?
was the one that was attacking.
Yeah,
Oh,
prosecute.
no, you're right. No, sorry, I got it messed up. Yep, that was a preacher.
Yeah. But these are all counter. His point is, I think they're all kind of counterproductive patterns that we fall into when we've attached our idea to our identity to an idea that might not be the best one, or that might be changing.
Yep, yeah,
As
something
we
that's
go.
fluid.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting reading this for me because I have at least one topic where I know I easily slip into preacher mode, and it's probably not always healthy. And you guys probably already know what I'm talking about.
You're gonna have to narrow it down, Eric.
Right. I love F sharp, and I will gladly evangelize it. I'm a Microsoft MVP, but I certainly get paid to evangelize F sharp. I just think it's great, and I want other people to think it's great. And I think it's one of those areas where I can let that slip a little too close to my identity, and now I'm not thinking objectively about comparing my language of choice to other languages.
Do you find that in some situations when you're wanting to advocate for F sharp, do you ever fall back to talking about functional programming, a more generic concept behind it?
Sure, somewhat, but I also know like if I look back objectively at what I have tried to talk people into, F sharp is like the big part of the pie chart, and Erlang and Haskell, Scala, Elixir, and which are all fantastic. I've not advocated for them nearly as often.
Because I say this because I'm thinking about my own, like, what have I preached? What have I prosecuted other people on? And you guys are giggling already because there's a long list. But I take something like Scrum, for example, which is now a thing I have distanced my identity from, and like what I find is that there were a lot of good ideas behind Scrum that I was really enthusiastic about, and so I used kind of Scrum as like the tip of the spear to present these ideas to others and in my preaching. And when I discovered that wasn't the best way to go about it, when I found other ways, it was in falling back on actually those ideas and let's talk about the more fundamental things that are less of the moment and less likely to be shifting with the wind.
Yeah, the concepts.
You're right, exactly.
So let's, in the last 5 minutes ish, let's cover the rethinking and overconfidence and I'm stupid thing, because I feel like that's a huge part of the second chapter and something that I'm sure we have a lot to, and I think that segues into what you were just talking about, like being able to have a novice view of Agile and using what you had learned. And once you got to the top there, you're like, oh, this got me far, but I see another higher plateau. But I got to go kind of back down and unlearn some of the stuff that I've learned. And so that way I can come up a different path,
Sure.
a different hill.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a really good example, because like forever you've always been like an Agile person, and for a long time you had picked up and taken the Scrum mantle, and then I remember very distinctly you putting it down, and I was like, that's quite a change.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is. I wonder where this is going to go, because, like, you don't. You are incredibly smart, and you don't make choices that aren't going to get you to a better spot.
I've taken wrong turns, for sure.
Oh,
But
no.
yeah, no, and I feel good about this one.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you're talking about, Brock, is what the book calls the rethinking cycle. And I'm just going to look at my notes for a second and make sure I say it right. So if you start with this idea that Grant calls confident humility, which we've not done justice unpacking, and people should read more about what Adam Grant means by that. But right, so confident humility leads to doubt. Doubt, not like an existential doubt, but just like, I might not know everything, right? Doubt leads to curiosity. Curiosity leads to discovery. And the more we learn as we discover, shows us what we don't know, which leads back to this confident humility. And so there's kind of that decision point when you're at the confident humility, and you can either stay in the rethinking cycle, or there's also an overconfident cycle. And so staying with this idea of Scrum, we're all old enough to remember like when Scrum became a thing, and I think we all kind of fell in love with it in the same general time frame. And we learned like, oh, there's a better way to develop software. But staying in the rethinking cycle means that as the wheel turns, it's like periodically you have to stay, okay, is there yet a better way? And if I learned a better way to develop software in the past, I certainly could learn another better way in the future, as opposed to like being in the rethinking cycle and like, and now I love Scrum, and now you like get stuck in the overconfidence cycle.
Yep.
I love that he included curiosity in that, because I feel like that is missing in so many aspects, and that like curiosity is something I have worked or tried very hard to instill in my mentees. Like, find out what they're curious about, and try and ignite that fire, and so that they stay curious and they can kind of be on the cusp of knowing the next thing, and then finding out, being curious about where they're at then, and that cycle just keeps improving you, and you keep iterating. You have that feedback loop, and you start feeling comfortable there, and that builds confidence, and I feel like that gives you that helps really lead to the confident humility mindset.
It's remarkable how curiosity is kind of a skeleton key that unlocks a lot of very hairy problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I went through a situation this year where I was challenged in my thinking about a programming language. I, for a decade, have thought that PHP was terrible, and allowed myself to be curious and like look and say, okay, where is this language now? I think they're up to PHP 9. And not just like a cursor, like, oh, I went and read the Wikipedia article, but actually kind of dove in and looked to see what frameworks are out there. And I was wrong. Like, it's a decent little language, and it's
come a long way.
Yeah, there are still things that maybe wouldn't be my choice, but I would say that I have been wrong about it in the past.
And I feel like that's a journey that a lot of people have gone through with something like .NET, which is, our shared comfort zone. I think there are a lot of people who are like, no, I'm not going to touch anything from Microsoft, and then have come around years later and been okay with it. I think that sort of thing happens, and staying in a curiosity loop allows it to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
One more thing, and that's that back in April, and I don't know if this is right because I'm not smart enough to figure it out, but the Dunning-Kruger effect is autocorrelation. And we can link to the article here, but somebody has at least appears to have debunked the Dunning-Kruger effect as to, by saying
I think I heard about this
statistical anomaly. So just to drop that, grenade on the conversation so far and all of that.
Well, what do they know? They can't even know that they don't know. So
the only reason they debunked it is they don't know enough about it.
I am openly curious about autocorrelation and whether the Dunning-Kruger effect even exists.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome find.
All right. I like the tagline to go out on. Stay curious.
Word.
All right. See you guys.
Bye.